The Velthari Dominion had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never known defeat. High Commander Zorath Velkan stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the inevitable silence, watching as another world burned beneath him. The flames of conquest painted the clouds in shades of orange and red, and he felt nothing but satisfaction at the sight. This was the 17th planet his fleet had conquered this cycle, and like all the others before it, its people had fallen quickly. They had possessed primitive weapons and fragile ships, and they had believed that courage alone could save them from the might of the Dominion. They had been wrong, just as every species before them had been wrong. Zorath turned away from the viewport and walked through the gleaming corridors of his ship. The walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light, and every surface reflected his tall, slender form back at him. His skin was pale silver, his eyes were deep purple, and his uniform displayed the countless medals he had earned through centuries of warfare. He was considered the greatest military commander in Dominion history, and he had earned that title through 200 years of unbroken victory. The doors to the war chamber slid open before him, and he entered to find his senior officers already waiting. They stood around a massive holographic display that showed the entire Orion Spur, with Dominion territory marked in brilliant gold. That gold covered nearly everything, leaving only small pockets of darkness at the edges where lesser species still clung to their freedom. Report. Zorath commanded as he took his place at the head of the table. Sub-Admiral Tyus stepped forward and bowed deeply before speaking. He was young for his rank, only 80 years old, but he had proven himself capable in dozens of campaigns. High Commander, our scouts have detected signals from an uncharted system at the far edge of the galaxy. Preliminary analysis indicates a spacefaring species we have not encountered before. Zorath raised one silver eyebrow with mild interest. New species were becoming rare these days, as the Dominion had already cataloged and conquered most of the galaxy's inhabitants. Show me. He ordered. The holographic display shifted and zoomed toward a small yellow star surrounded by 8 planets. One of those planets, the third from the star, glowed with the unmistakable signs of advanced civilization. They call themselves humans, Tyth continued, and they appear to have achieved faster than light travel approximately 200 years ago. Their technology is primitive by our standards, and our scouts estimate their total military strength at fewer than 100 warships. A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled officers. 100 ships was nothing compared to the Dominion's fleets, which numbered in the hundreds of thousands. What do we know about their biology? Zorath asked. They are carbon-based bipeds, roughly similar to us in basic structure, but much shorter and more fragile. They require constant hydration and regular sleep cycles, and their natural lifespan is less than 100 years without medical intervention. More laughter filled the chamber. The Velthari could live for 500 years naturally, and their elite could extend that to nearly 1,000 with proper treatment. Zorath allowed himself a thin smile. This conquest would be simple, hardly worth his personal attention. Send a subjugation fleet, he ordered. 300 ships should be more than sufficient. Sub-Admiral Tyth, you will lead the expedition and bring these humans into the Dominion. Tyth's eyes widened with excitement at the honor. Leading a subjugation fleet was a guaranteed path to glory, and conquering a new species would cement his reputation for generations. It will be done. High Commander, he said with another deep bow, I will have their surrender within 1 cycle. As the officers filed out to prepare for the expedition, Zorath remained behind and studied the holographic display. There was something about this small blue world that nagged at the edge of his thoughts, but he could not identify what it was. He pushed the feeling aside. His instincts had served him well throughout his career, but there was nothing special about these humans. They were just another primitive species waiting to be conquered. No different from the 37 others, the Dominion had already crushed. The Grand War Academy on the Velthari homeworld taught that war was a science, as precise and predictable as mathematics. When one possessed superior firepower, superior numbers, and superior discipline, victory was not merely likely, but inevitable. The Dominion possessed all three advantages in abundance, and they had never encountered an enemy who could match them in the Academy's Hall of Conquest. Massive statues commemorated each of the 37 species the Dominion had defeated. Some of those species still existed as servant races, laboring for their masters in mines and factories, while others had been completely exterminated when they proved too troublesome to control. Young Velthari officers walked past those statues every day, studying the weaknesses that had led to each species' downfall. Some had been too trusting, others too divided, and still others too proud to surrender when surrender was their only hope of survival. All of them had shared one fatal flaw. They had believed they could resist the Dominion. The humans would soon learn the same lesson. Zora thought as he finally left the war chamber. They would resist at first, because all species did. But their resistance would crumble when they saw the true might arrayed against them. Perhaps a few of their warriors would fight bravely and earn an honorable death. Or perhaps they would simply surrender when they realized the hopelessness of their situation. Either way, the outcome was predetermined. 300 warships departed from the Dominion's forward base 6 days later, their crystalline hulls gleaming as they entered hyperspace. Each ship was a masterpiece of Velthari engineering, armed with plasma lances that could melt through any known armor and protected by shields that had never been breached. Sub-Admiral Tyeth stood on the bridge of his command ship, the crushing tide, and watched the stars blur into lines as his fleet accelerated toward the human homeworld. He had studied everything the scouts had gathered about this strange species, and he felt confident that the campaign would be short and decisive. The humans had shown some unusual characteristics in the intercepted transmissions his analysts had studied. They seemed remarkably aggressive toward each other, with multiple competing nations and factions even on their single inhabited world. This internal division would make them easy to conquer, Tyeth reasoned. A species that could not unite against itself had no hope of uniting against an external threat. He had prepared his standard subjugation broadcast, which would offer the humans two choices: immediate surrender and integration into the Dominion as a servant race, or complete annihilation. Most species chose the former when they understood the odds against them. The journey through hyperspace took 12 days, and Tyeth used that time to drill his crews and refine his battle plans. Not that he expected to need them, but proper preparation was the mark of a competent officer. When the fleet finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human system, Tyeth felt a surge of anticipation. Soon he would add another conquest to his record, another step toward the rank of High Commander. Looked at the small blue world in the distance and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had no idea what was coming for them, and by the time they understood, it would already be too late. The Velthari had mastered war over 12,000 years of conquest, and no primitive species with a mere 2 centuries of space travel could hope to challenge that mastery, at least. That was what Tyeth believed. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Sub-Admiral Tyeth ordered his fleet to advance toward the human homeworld in standard conquest formation, with his heaviest warships at the center and lighter vessels spreading out in a protective screen. It was a formation that had crushed countless enemies, and he expected it to work just as well against these primitive humans. His communications officer turned to him with a puzzled expression on her face. "Sub-Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from the humans. They are using our own communication frequencies." Tyeth felt a flicker of surprise. The humans should not have been able to decode Velthari communications so quickly, but he dismissed the concern as unimportant. Display it," he commanded. The main view screen flickered and then showed an image that made the entire bridge crew fall silent. A human woman sat in a command chair, wearing a dark uniform covered in insignia that Tyeth did not recognize. Her hair was gray and cut short. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp and steady. She spoke in perfect Velthari, without any trace of accent. "Attention Velthari Fleet. I am Admiral Helena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered sovereign human territory without permission. I am ordering you to reverse course and leave this system immediately. This is your only warning." Tyus stared at the screen in disbelief for a moment before bursting into laughter. His officers joined him, and soon the entire bridge was filled with the sound of Veltari amusement. The audacity of this human was almost admirable. She commanded perhaps 100 ships at most, facing a fleet 3 times that size, yet she dared to issue threats as if she held the superior position. You've composed himself and gestured for his communications officer to open a return channel. "Human Admiral," he said with a condescending smile. "I am Sub-Admiral Tyeth of the Velthari Dominion. Your species has been selected for integration into our great civilization. You have 2 options. Surrender immediately, and your people will be allowed to live as servants of the Dominion, or resist and face complete extermination. I suggest you choose wisely." He waited for the fear to appear on her face, for the dawning realization of hopelessness that he had seen on so many alien commanders before her. Instead, Admiral Vasquez simply nodded once, as if she had expected exactly this response. "I understand," she said calmly. "You have made your choice." The transmission ended, and the view screen returned to showing the starfield ahead. It felt a moment of confusion. Where was the panic, the desperate pleas for mercy, the frantic attempts to negotiate better terms? This human had simply accepted his ultimatum and signed off as if she were ending a routine business call. "Sub-Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "the human ships are retreating toward their homeworld. It appears they are consolidating their defensive position." "As expected," Tyeth said, though a small part of him remained troubled by the Admiral's strange calmness. "All ships, continue advance. We will crush whatever defenses they attempt to mount." The fleet moved deeper into the human system, passing the outer planets without incident. Tyeth studied the tactical display and noted the positions of the human ships clustered around their homeworld. "Analysis of human vessels," he ordered. "Their ships appear to be constructed primarily of metal alloys and ceramics," his tactical officer replied. "Their weapon systems include kinetic projectile launchers and what appear to be directed energy weapons of moderate power. Estimated combat effectiveness is approximately 15% of our own vessels." Tyeth nodded with satisfaction. The numbers confirmed what he had already assumed, and this would be a simple victory. The fleet passed the orbit of a large ringed gas giant and continued toward the inner system. They were making excellent time, and Tyeth began composing his victory report in his head. "Sub-Admiral," his sensor officer suddenly called out. "I am detecting an anomaly." "Explain," Tyeth demanded. "There's a large mass emerging from behind one of the moons of the gas giant. It appears to be a ship, but the readings do not match any vessel in our database." The tactical display updated, and Tyeth felt his breath catch in his throat. The ship that emerged from hiding was enormous, far larger than anything the Velthari had ever built. It was nearly 3 times the length of Tyeth's own command vessel, and its design was utterly unlike the elegant crystalline aesthetic of Dominion warships. This human ship was brutal and angular, with sharp edges and flat surfaces that seemed designed to intimidate rather than impress. Its hull was covered in thick armor plating, and weapons bristled from every surface like the spines of some massive predatory creature. "What is that thing?" One of his officers whispered. The human vessel moved toward the Velthari fleet with deliberate slowness, as if it wanted to give them plenty of time to appreciate its size and power. The name painted on its hull in massive letters became visible as it drew closer. U.S. Paromate to U.S. Admiral. Vasquez's face appeared on the view screen once again. Uninvited this time. You were warned. She said. Simpliteeth felt a surge of anger that burned away his momentary fear. No matter how large this ship was, it was still just one vessel against 300. All ships, open fire, he commanded. Destroy that monstrosity. 300. Valkyrie warships turned their weapons toward the Prometheus and unleashed the full fury of the Dominion. Thousands of plasma lances streaked through space, converging on the human battleship in a brilliant display of destructive power. The plasma struck the Prometheus in a continuous barrage that would have melted any Dominion ship to slag within seconds. The Prometheus did not slow down. The Prometheus did not change course. The Prometheus did not even seem to notice it. Watched in horrified disbelief as his entire fleet poured fire into the human vessel, and the human vessel simply absorbed it all. The plasma splashed against its armor and dissipated harmlessly, leaving nothing but scorch marks that faded as he watched. Impossible. His tactical officer breathed. Our weapons are having no effect. Their armor, it is unlike anything in our records. The Prometheus continued its advance, and now it began to return fire. Teeth had never seen weapons like the ones the human ship deployed. Massive cannons along its spine hurled projectiles at velocities his sensors could barely track. And those projectiles tore through Valkyrie shields as if they did not exist. The crystalline hull of the warship next to the crushing tide exploded as a human projectile punched through it from bow to stern. The ship simply came apart, scattering debris and bodies into the void. Evasive maneuvers, Tyeth screamed. All ships. Evasive maneuvers, but there was no evading the Prometheus. The human battleship moved through the Valkyrie formation like a predator through a school of fish, its weapons firing in continuous sequence. Each shot destroyed or crippled a Dominion vessel, and the precise targeting suggested that every single impact was calculated, and intentional swarms of smaller craft poured from the Prometheus's launch bays. Hundreds of autonomous drones that moved with impossible coordination. They swept through the fleet, targeting engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. Teeth watched his tactical display transform from a picture of overwhelming Dominion superiority to a nightmare of destruction. His ships were dying by the dozens, and he could do nothing to stop it. Signal all ships, he ordered desperately. Concentrate fire on their engines. We must disable them. The surviving Valkyrie vessels attempted to regroup and focus their attack, but the Prometheus seemed to anticipate every tactic they tried. When they concentrated their fire, it deployed some kind of energy shield that deflected the plasma back at them. When they attempted to flank it, the drones intercepted them with devastating effectiveness. This was not a battle. Tyeth realized with growing horror this was an execution. The transmission from Admiral Vasquez appeared on his screen one final time. Your fleet is destroyed, she said without any trace of satisfaction or cruelty in her voice. Collect your survivors and return to your Dominion. Tell them what you witnessed here today. Tell them that the Prometheus is not our newest ship. It is our oldest. Tell them that we have been preparing for this moment for a very long time. And tell them this. Humanity does not surrender. The transmission ended, and Tyeth looked at his tactical display with despair. Of his 300 warships, fewer than 20 remained functional, and most of those were badly damaged. He had been sent to conquer a primitive species, and he had been utterly annihilated. The survivors of the Valkyrie subjugation fleet limped away from the human system, carrying with them a message that would shake the Dominion to its very foundations. The recordings from the battle reached the Valkyrie homeworld 3 weeks after the fleet's destruction, and they spread through the Dominion like a virus. Soldiers and civilians alike watched in stunned silence as the Prometheus tore through 300 warships. And for the first time in 12,000 years, the Valkyrie felt something they had never experienced before: fear high. Commander Zorath Velkan watched the recording 17 times in his private chambers, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what he was seeing. He analyzed every moment of the battle, looking for weaknesses in the human vessel or mistakes in Typh's tactics. He found nothing. The humans had not won through luck or surprise. They had won through absolute superiority in every aspect of warfare that mattered. Their weapons were more powerful. Their defenses were impenetrable, and their tactics were unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. The Prometheus had fought as if it could predict every move the Valkyrie would make before they made it. Zorath summoned his war council and demanded answers. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice cold with barely contained rage. "We are the masters of war. We have conquered 37 species. How could one primitive race defeat us so completely?" His admirals and generals exchanged uncomfortable glances, but none of them had answers to give. The Grand War Academy had been studying the recordings for days, and their best minds had reached a terrifying conclusion. Senior strategist Morth, the oldest and most respected teacher at the Academy, finally spoke. "High Commander, the problem is not their technology, though that is formidable. The problem is their approach to war itself. They do not fight the way we fight. They do not fight the way any species we have encountered fights." Explained. Zorath demanded. Morth activated a holographic display showing key moments from the battle. "Watch here," he said, highlighting a sequence where the Prometheus had appeared to retreat before suddenly reversing course and catching a group of pursuing Valkyrie ships in a devastating crossfire. "This is a feint, a deliberate deception designed to lure our ships into a trap. We do not use such tactics because we have never needed them. Our superior firepower has always been sufficient to achieve victory through direct confrontation." He highlighted another sequence where human drones had targeted the engines of fleeing Valkyrie ships rather than their weapons or bridges. "And here, they are not trying to destroy our ships quickly. They are crippling them, leaving them helpless but intact. This serves multiple purposes. It forces other ships to slow down and assist their comrades. It creates obstacles in the battle space. And it demoralizes the surviving crews who must watch their allies die slowly." Zorath felt a chill run down his spine. This was not warfare as the Dominion understood it. This was something far more brutal and calculating. "They also hacked into our communications network during the battle," Morth continued. "They broadcast false orders to several ships, causing confusion and friendly fire incidents. We have never encountered an enemy capable of penetrating our encryption so quickly, and we certainly never expected them to use that capability for psychological warfare." Psychological warfare. Zorath repeated the unfamiliar term, the deliberate targeting of an enemy's morale and mental state rather than their physical forces. Morth explained. "The humans seem to understand that breaking an enemy's will to fight is as important as destroying their ships. Perhaps more important." The War Council sat in troubled silence as the implications sank in. The Valkyrie had always viewed war as a straightforward contest of strength, a mathematical equation where the side with more firepower inevitably prevailed. The humans viewed war as something else entirely, something far more complex and far more dangerous. "There is more," Morris said reluctantly. "I have been analyzing the human vessel's performance throughout the engagement, and I have reached a disturbing conclusion. The Prometheus was not fighting at full capacity." "What do you mean?" Zorath asked sharply. "The ship's weapons fire rate was inconsistent, suggesting they were deliberately holding back. Their defensive systems activated only when necessary, rather than maintaining continuous operation. And their drone swarms were recalled before they had finished neutralizing all targets." The humans could have destroyed our entire fleet in half the time they actually took. Why would they hold back? One of the admirals asked in confusion. Because they wanted survivors, Morith answered. They wanted us to see what they could do. They wanted us to carry that message back to the Dominion. This was not just a battle. It was a demonstration. The revelation hit Zorath like a physical blow. The humans had not merely defended themselves. They had sent a message, and that message was clear. We are stronger than you. And we want you to know it. Admiral Vasquez said something else in her final transmission. Another officer noted. She said the Prometheus was their oldest ship, not their newest. The room fell completely silent if the Prometheus was obsolete by human standards. What did their newer vessels look like? What weapons did they carry? What defenses protected them? We must know more about these humans. Zorath declared, I want every piece of information we can gather. Their history, their culture, their technology, everything. We cannot fight an enemy we do not understand. In the weeks that followed, Valkyrie intelligence operatives worked frantically to intercept and decode human communications. They sent stealth probes into the Sol system and established hidden observation posts at the edge of human-controlled space. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. The humans had not developed their military technology in response to the Valkyrie threat. Records indicated that ships like the Prometheus had been under construction for over 50 years, long before the Dominion had even detected humanity's existence. They had been preparing for war against someone. But that someone was not the Valkyrie. Who were they preparing to fight? Zorath wondered aloud as he reviewed the intelligence reports. The answer came from an unexpected source, a junior analyst named Salith had been assigned to study human cultural transmissions, what the humans called entertainment. She had spent weeks watching their fictional stories and historical documentaries. Trying to understand how they thought and what they valued, she requested an audience with the High Commander. And something in her report convinced his aides to grant it. Salith was young and nervous as she stood before the most powerful military leader in the Dominion. But she forced herself to speak clearly. High Commander, I believe I understand why the humans are so formidable. The answer is in their history. She activated her own holographic display, showing images of human conflicts throughout their existence. The humans have been at war with themselves for as long as their recorded history exists. They have fought over territory, resources, religion, ideology, and sometimes simply because different groups of humans hated each other. The display showed ancient battles with primitive weapons, massive industrial wars with machines of destruction, and finally the terrible conflicts that had nearly destroyed their civilization before they reached the stars. While we spent 12,000 years perfecting our tactics against weaker species, the humans spent their entire history fighting equals. They developed deception because straightforward attacks did not work against enemies who knew them just as well as they knew themselves. They developed psychological warfare because their enemies were too similar to defeat through firepower alone. They developed adaptive tactics because their enemies were constantly adapting. 2. Zorath stared at the images of human warfare, watching as they slaughtered each other with ever more creative and devastating methods. Every weapon they possess, every tactic they employ, every strategy they have mastered, all of it was forged in the fires of fighting themselves. Salith continued. They did not build the Prometheus to fight us. They built it to fight each other. We are simply the first external enemy to encounter the results of their self-inflicted evolution. The implications were staggering. The humans were not a young species that had stumbled upon advanced technology by accident. They were an old species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing in the harshest possible school, war against themselves. High Commander, Salith concluded, they are not what we thought they were. They are something far more dangerous. Zorath looked at the young analyst for a long moment before speaking. "Prepare a full report for the Supreme Council. It seems we have finally found an enemy worthy of our full attention." The Supreme Council of the Velthari Dominion had not convened an emergency session for over 3,000 years, but the destruction of the subjugation fleet had shattered their complacency. 12 ancient counselors sat in their crystalline thrones, their faces grim as they listened to Salith's report. High Commander Zorath stood beside the young analyst, lending his authority to her findings. What she had discovered was too important to be dismissed as the ravings of a junior officer. "You are telling us," Supreme Counselor Veth said slowly, "that these humans spend their entire history murdering each other, and this somehow makes them better warriors." "Not just better," Salith replied, her voice steady despite the weight of the ancient gazes upon her. "Fundamentally different. Every species we have conquered developed warfare as a response to external threats. They built weapons to defend against predators or rival species. But the humans had no such threats. They were the apex predators of their world. The only thing dangerous enough to threaten a human was another human." She displayed more images from human history, showing the progression of their weapons from sharpened stones to nuclear warheads in less than 10,000 years. They went from fighting with sticks and rocks to developing weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization. They came close to extinction multiple times, not because of outside forces, but because they could not stop fighting each other. "Then how did they survive?" another counselor asked. "How did they reach the stars if they were so determined to destroy themselves?" "They learned to control their aggression. But they never lost it," Salith explained. "When they finally achieved unity, it was not because they stopped being violent. It was because they redirected that violence outward. They looked at the stars and saw not wonder, but potential threats. They built their fleet not for exploration, but for war against enemies they had not even met yet." Zorath stepped forward to add his own observations. "I have reviewed their military doctrine personally. They call it defense in depth. They assume that any contact with alien life will eventually lead to conflict. So they prepare for that conflict from the moment they detect another civilization's existence. They knew about us before we knew about them." He continued, "Their scouts detected our expansion centuries ago, and they have been building their forces ever since. The Prometheus was completed 40 years before we even sent our subjugation fleet. They were ready for us before we knew they existed." The council chamber fell silent as the ancient leaders processed this information. For 12,000 years, they had assumed they were the supreme power in the galaxy. Unchallenged and unchallengeable now, they learned that a species they had dismissed as primitive had been watching them, studying them, and preparing to destroy them. "What do you recommend?" Supreme Counselor Veth asked Zorath directly. High Commander had thought about this question constantly since receiving the first reports from the human system. Every option he considered seemed inadequate. But one truth had become clear to him. "We cannot defeat them with a simple show of force," he admitted, the words bitter on his tongue. "Their technology is at least equal to ours, and their tactics are superior. If we send another fleet, we will suffer another defeat." "Then what do you suggest?" a counselor demanded angrily. "Surrender." "The Dominion does not surrender. I suggest we learn," Zorath replied. "We must study their way of war and adapt our own forces to counter it. We must develop new weapons, new tactics, new strategies. And we must do so quickly, before they decide to bring the war to us." The council debated for hours, but eventually they reached a consensus. The Dominion would mobilize its full military might, something that had not been done in millennia. Every shipyard would produce warships at maximum capacity. Every soldier would undergo intensive retraining. And the Grand War Academy would completely restructure its curriculum. They would meet the human threat with everything they had, while the Dominion prepared for war. Salith continued her research into human history and culture. She became obsessed with understanding these strange beings who had turned their own violent nature into a weapon. She discovered that humans had a concept they called the fog of war. The idea that no battle plan survived contact with the enemy. Their entire military philosophy was built around adapting to unexpected situations, improvising solutions to unforeseen problems. The Valkyrie, by contrast, had always relied on superior firepower and overwhelming numbers to achieve victory. They did not need to adapt because their enemies could not resist them. But the humans had spent their history fighting enemies who could resist, who could adapt, who could think just as quickly and creatively as they could. She also discovered something that disturbed her deeply. The humans did not hate the Volthar. Their historical records showed that they had expected to encounter alien civilizations eventually, and they had prepared for the worst. But they did not assume that aliens would be hostile. They simply prepared for the possibility. When the Valkyrie had arrived with demands for surrender, the humans had been disappointed, not angry. They had hoped for peaceful contact, but they were not surprised when they received threats instead. This was perhaps the most terrifying thing about them. Salith realized. They did not need hatred to fight. They did not need righteous fury or desperate survival instinct. They simply assessed the threat, calculated the necessary response, and executed it with cold efficiency. The Dominion soldiers fought for glory and honor. Human soldiers fought to win, and they did not care how ugly the victory might be. As months passed, and the Dominion's preparations continued. More intelligence arrived from the human system. The humans had not pursued their advantage after destroying the subjugation fleet. They had returned to their homeworld and resumed their normal activities. As if nothing had happened. Why do they not attack? Zorath wondered as he reviewed the reports. They have demonstrated their superiority. They could strike at our forward bases and expand their territory. But instead they do nothing. Salith, who had become his unofficial advisor on human behavior, offered an explanation. They do not want war, High Commander. They never did. They only want to be left alone. If we had never sent our fleet, they would have been content to remain in their small corner of the galaxy indefinitely. Then they are weak, Zora said dismissively. No, Salith disagreed. They are patient. They know that we will come again, and they are preparing for that day. Every moment of peace is time they use to build more ships, train more soldiers, develop more weapons. They are not idle. They are waiting. Zorath felt a chill at her words. The Dominion was racing to prepare for the next confrontation, but so were the humans. And the humans had a head start. He thought about Admiral Vasquez, the human commander who had faced his fleet with such calm certainty. She had known exactly what would happen when the battle began. She had known that her single ship could destroy 300 Valkyrie warships. And she had tried to warn them. The humans had offered mercy, Zorath realized. They had given the Dominion a chance to retreat, to avoid the slaughter that followed. But Tyeth had been too arrogant to listen, too confident in Valkyrie superiority, to recognize the danger that arrogance had cost the Dominion 300 ships and thousands of livers. Looked at the holographic map of the galaxy and studied the small blue dot that represented Earth. Such a tiny world, circling such an ordinary star. How could something so insignificant pose such a threat to an empire that spanned thousands of systems? But he knew the answer now. It was not the world that was dangerous, but the beings who lived upon it. They had clawed their way up from animals to gods, fighting every step of the way. And they had carried those lessons with them to the stars. The Dominion had mastered the art of conquest through superior force. The humans had mastered the art of survival through any means necessary, and survival, Zorath was beginning to understand, was far more dangerous than conquest. He gave the order to assemble the full armada. Every ship the Dominion possessed would converge on the human system. 12,000 warships against the handful of vessels humanity could field. This time, there would be no half measures. This time, they would commit everything. And still, deep in his heart, Zorath was not certain it would be enough. The full armada of the Velthari Dominion arrived at the edge of the Sol system like a swarm of crystalline stars. 12,000 warships arranged in a formation that stretched across millions of kilometers. It was the largest military force ever assembled in the history of the galaxy, representing the full might of an empire that had conquered worlds beyond counting high. Commander Zorath Vulcan stood on the bridge of the inevitable silence, watching as his fleet completed its emergence from hyperspace. This time, he had come personally. This time, there would be no underestimating the enemy. "Report," he commanded. "All ships have arrived and are in formation." His tactical officer replied, "We are detecting human vessels gathering near their homeworld. Current count is 47 ships. 47 against 12,000. The numbers should have been reassuring, but Zorath remembered what the Prometheus alone had done to 300 vessels. He remembered the recordings of Velthari ships exploding like fragile toys against that terrible human weapon. "Identify the human vessels," he ordered, the tactical display updated with information gathered by Dominion intelligence over the past months. The Prometheus was there, of course, along with 3 other ships of similar size and configuration. The humans called them the Achilles, the Ares, and a massive carrier named Pandora. The remaining vessels were smaller but still formidable, each one bristling with the strange weapons that had torn the subjugation fleet apart. "High Commander," his communications officer said, "we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet." Zorath braced himself and ordered the transmission displayed. Admiral Vasquez appeared on his screen once again, looking exactly as she had in the recordings from the first battle. Calm, confident, and utterly unafraid. "High Commander Zorath," she said, "I know who you are. Your reputation precedes you. I want you to understand that what happens next is not something I desire. You have brought your entire fleet to threaten my people, and I must respond accordingly. But this does not have to end in total destruction. You can still turn back." "Turn back," Zorath repeated with a harsh laugh. "You have 47 ships. I have 12,000. Even your Prometheus cannot fight those odds." Vasquez smiled, and something in that smile made Zorath's blood run cold. "High Commander, the Prometheus is indeed powerful, but you are correct that it cannot destroy 12,000 ships alone. That is why I brought its sisters. That is why I brought Pandora and her wings. And that is why I am not relying on ships alone." The tactical display suddenly erupted with warnings as thousands of new contacts appeared throughout the system. They emerged from behind moons, from within asteroid fields, from positions that Dominion sensors had scanned and cleared hours ago. "What is this?" Zorath demanded. "Autonomous defense platforms," his tactical officer replied with growing alarm. "Thousands of them. They were hidden, somehow shielded from our sensors." "High Commander, we are completely surrounded." Vasquez's voice continued over the channel. "You see, we have had 2 centuries to prepare for this moment. We knew that someday, something would come out of the darkness between stars to threaten us. We hoped it would be friendly. We prepared for it to be hostile. Every planet in this system is defended. Every moon hides weapons platforms. And every single one of those platforms is now targeting your fleet." Zora stared at the tactical display and felt the cold grip of despair close around his heart. The humans had not been idle during the months since the first battle. They had been completing a defensive network that made their entire system into a fortress. "You cannot win this battle," Vasquez said simply. "Your technology is impressive, but ours is equal. Your numbers are vast, but our defenses are prepared. And your soldiers fight for conquest, while mine fight for survival. We have everything to lose, and that makes us very dangerous. We will fight, Zorath declared, though his voice lacked the certainty he had felt when the fleet departed from Dominion space. The Dominion does not surrender. Then you will die, Vasquez replied without malice. But I am offering you an alternative. Withdraw your fleet and return to your territory. Leave humanity and our neighbors in peace. Do this, and there will be no further conflict between us. Zorath wanted to refuse. Every instinct of his 200 years of military service screamed at him to attack, to prove that the Dominion was still the supreme power in the galaxy. But he looked at the tactical display and saw the truth. This was not a battle he could win. He turned to Salith, who stood quietly at the edge of the bridge, observing everything. What would they do? He asked her quietly. If they were in my position, Salith considered the question carefully before answering. They would fight, she said, but only if they believed victory was possible. Their history is full of desperate last stands and heroic sacrifices, but those happened when retreat was not an option. When retreat was possible, they took it. They regrouped, they rebuilt, and they returned stronger. You are saying I should retreat. I'm saying that the humans understand something we have never had to learn. Sometimes the bravest thing to do is survive. Zora stood in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of 12,000 years of Dominion history pressing down upon him. No High Commander had ever retreated from battle. No Armada had ever turned back from a conquest, but no High Commander had ever faced an enemy like this. Order all ships to hold position, he said finally. Open a channel to Admiral Vasquez. When the human commander appeared on his screen again, Zorath forced himself to speak the words he had never imagined, saying, "What are your terms?" The battle that followed lasted 9 days, because not every Velthari captain obeyed the order to stand down. Some refused to accept that the Dominion could be defeated, and they charged toward the human lines with suicidal determination. They died. Every single one of them, but the majority of the fleet survived, because Zorath held them back while he negotiated with Vasquez. The terms she offered were not what he expected. The humans did not demand tribute or territory. They did not require the Dominion to disarm or submit to occupation. They asked only for peace, for recognition of their sovereignty. And for one thing more, you will release the conquered species, Vasquez said. The 37 civilizations your Dominion has enslaved. They will be given the choice to remain under your rule or to establish their own independent governments. And you will not punish them for whichever choice they make. You ask us to give up our empire, Zorath said bitterly. I ask you to give up your slaves, Vasquez corrected. Your empire can continue to exist. Your people can continue to thrive. But you will no longer build your prosperity on the suffering of others. That is the price of peace. It took months for the full terms to be finalized and years for them to be implemented. Many in the Dominion resisted the changes, and there were rebellions and civil conflicts that threatened to tear the ancient civilization apart. But in the end, the Dominion survived, diminished but intact, and something unexpected happened. The liberated species did not turn on their former masters. Some did choose independence, building new civilizations on the ruins of their occupied worlds. But others chose to remain within a reformed Dominion, one that treated them as partners rather than servants. Humanity helped with the rebuilding. They shared technology and knowledge freely, asking nothing in return except friendship. They established trade routes and cultural exchanges. They welcomed visitors to their strange blue world and visited the ancient homeworlds of the Dominion in Turnzilith, who had risen to become one of the most respected scholars in Velthari history, spent years studying the new relationship between the species. She wrote volumes analyzing how former enemies had become allies, how conquest had given way to cooperation. She concluded that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their tactics. It was their ability to see enemies as potential friends. They had spent their history fighting each other, yes, but they had also spent their history making peace with each other. Every war in human history had eventually ended, not with extermination, but with reconciliation. Former enemies had become allies, rival nations had merged into unions, and old hatreds had faded into memory. The humans understood something the Dominion had never learned. War was not the natural state of intelligent beings. It was a disease that could be cured if both sides were willing to try. Decades after the Great Battle, a new threat emerged from the galactic core. Something ancient and vast and hungry began to stir, sending probes into inhabited space that consumed everything they touched. The coalition that formed to face this threat included humans and Velthari fighting side by side, along with dozens of other species who had once been enemies. Admiral Vasquez, old now but still commanding, stood on the bridge of a new flagship that incorporated technology from a dozen civilizations. High Commander Zarth, retired from active service but called back for this final campaign, stood beside her as the combined fleet prepared to engage the enemy. "Are you ready?" Vasquez asked him. Zarth looked at the tactical display showing the approaching horror, and then at the fleet of former enemies united against a common foe. "I have learned much from humanity," he said, "including the most important lesson of all." "And what is that?" "That survival is not just about winning wars," Zarth replied. "It is about building something worth surviving for."